All right, welcome back to Module 11 of Investment Rental Properties. In this section, we are going to be taking a deep dive into the key points that you need in your lease agreements as well as your other contracts. Number one, we have to document our expectations. So make sure that you're laying out all of your expectations on the table and that it's written into your lease agreement. Define the lease terms and length. So the lease term or the lease length is how long this person is going to be in the property. So if it's a 6-month lease, or if it's a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease, that needs to be spelled out in the terms of the document. Establish rent and deposits. So the gross amount of rent that's going to be paid to you by the tenant needs to be established and defined in that agreement, as well as any security deposits or pet deposits or any other type of deposits, refundable or non-refundable. Those all need to be outlined and specifically addressed inside of that lease. It's important to define the parties. Who is entering into this contract? Well, you're going to define yourself, the landlord, as the owner of the property, and you're going to define the tenant as the person who you have picked as the approved party to rent this property. Define the property. Usually the address will do just fine, but if you want to go the extra mile, go ahead and add the tax information in there as well. Provide contact information for both parties. How do they get a hold of you? How do they pay you? Where is that rent deposited? All of that needs to be outlined inside of the lease. And do note that changes to any standard lease agreement need to be done with an addendum. You don't want to tear up the original lease and make your changes to it and then sign it again, because there may be copies floating around out there. And if it ever came to litigation, there would be an argument as to which lease agreement was the actual agreement. So make sure that all of your changes are done with addendums to the original lease agreement. Now, when signing the lease, let's go through some of the steps that are going to help protect you as the landlord. Step 1, ensure 2 copies of all paperwork are ready prior to meeting the tenant. Sign and initial as the manager of all documents in advance. Digital signatures obviously help with this process. Step 2, the tenant reviews and signs the lease and the addendums. Step 3, conduct property condition checklists together. You may want to take the tenant to the property and walk through the property together, assessing the condition, taking good notes and pictures, so that if there's any question as to the condition of the property when the tenant leaves, the original notes and pictures can be consulted. Step 4, give paperwork packet to tenant. Make sure at this point of the process that you have a copy of all the adult's driver's licenses and the vehicle plates or registrations so that you know what vehicles should be parked at the property. Now, when it comes to the security deposit is considered the lawful property of the tenant until the landlord establishes a right to it. A security deposit is refundable. It cannot legally exceed 1.5 times the monthly rent. It must be deposited into a trust account at an insured financial institution. The landlord sometimes may use the funds for any purpose so long as he or she obtains a cash or surety bond. The landlord may be required to provide the tenant with the name of the institution holding the security deposit. Remember that these security deposits are refundable, so you will need to give them back to the tenant as long as the property is left in good condition. Now, there are other deposits that are not refundable, such as a pet deposit, which you can just book to the property as profit. However, the security deposit is a refundable deposit and needs to be kept in trust until the landlord establishes a right to it. So let's talk about the scenarios where you get to keep the security deposit. The security deposit may be kept for the following: reimbursement to the landlord for actual damage. It may be applied toward unpaid rent. It may be applied towards utility bills not paid by the tenant. And it may be applied to marketing costs if the lease is broken by the tenant. Within 14 days of termination, the landlord must mail the tenant a written notice of damages, otherwise he forfeits his right to the deposit. So make sure you're on top of that. You've got 2 weeks to notify the tenant in writing why you're keeping their deposit, otherwise you forfeit it. Within 4 days of termination of the lease, the tenant must notify the landlord of forwarding addresses, otherwise the landlord must mail the notice to the last known address. Within 7 days of receipt of the notice of damages, the tenant must respond in writing if he or she disagrees with the charges. The steps that I just went through are governed by each state's individual laws. So make sure that you're aware of your state's laws so that you can stay compliant. Remember that the landlord is not entitled to keep the deposit for any wear and tear damages, to double dip on any rental fees that you've already charged, or to cover costs that should already be covered by non-refundable deposits, such as a pet deposit. If you as a landlord do not follow these laws, you're opening yourself up to some pretty harsh punishment. You will waive all your rights to claim damages, as well as you'll be liable to the tenant for double or triple the amount of the security deposit, plus the initial deposit. So just make sure that you're following the laws and keep yourself safe. It's very, very important that you make sure that each renter gets renter's insurance. It's useful to educate your tenants on how they can protect themselves and you. The landlord's property insurance does not cover the tenant's personal belongings in the event of a fire or theft, etc. So require a tenant to get a renter's policy. Always assume that your tenant is a lawyer and/or a professional tenant. And you know what I mean by that. These are people who are expert at taking advantage of unsuspecting landlords. So educate yourself and stay on guard. All right, this concludes our contracts and lease agreements module. Thanks for hanging out with me in this one. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. If you want to learn even more about this topic, hop on a free one-on-one strategy call with us. All you have to do is visit flippin.education to book your call today. That's flippin.education. Hope to see you there. And until next time, we'll see you on the flip side.